Hey guys, quick update slash apology slash heads up slash apology. As you know, we try to get lots of different people from all over the place for this podcast, and sometimes when we do that, that means that there are technical problems and this and that happening. Similar such technical problem with Radhika Vaz's episode. First half does not have video, only has audio. Second half has audio and video. Why did it happen? Doesn't matter. It's happened. See you next week.
Hello, and welcome to the Akash and Friends podcast. We are back with yet another episode with a good old friend, a person who I haven't had a chance to hang out with much. So it should be a nice discoverable kind of discovery. I don't know what the fuck it is, but give it up for Radhika Vaz. Thank you so much for joining us today, Radhika.
Oh, you're so welcome, Akash.
It's gonna be a fair bit of lag here. I have a feeling we're gonna get a lot of lag today. This Gurgaon Baroda connection is becoming I think
Okay,
a
got
long
it.
connection. Yeah. Okay, wait. Let me also. Are you on? are you
Well,
on
between
home Wi-Fi?
Baroda and Gurgaon, I am on my home Wi-Fi, yeah.
Okay. I think then it's my Wi-Fi.
But my home
This
Wi-Fi is pretty good.
Yeah, so then it's mine, which is okay. It'll get done in a second. Wait. Oh, great. Love it. Okay, now this should work. Okay, let's see if there's a lag now. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, yes, lag is gone. Okay. That is, you see that person walking upar se piche se, that's the, yeah,
Yes.
that's Devanshi. I'm in Baroda recording a music album, believe it or not. And Devanshi is recording BTS for the music album.
You're a musician?
I also didn't know, bolo.
I really did not. But what kind of music? Now it's become my podcast. I've got all the questions.
No, it's such a conversation. I absolutely welcome questions because who doesn't like talking about themselves?
Themselves, I know.
Yeah. So I know I was a musician first and then I became a comic and now
Okay.
so the pandemic made me realize that if mortality is probably like closer than expected.
You know
so
that
I should
Eddie Murphy recorded like a single back in the day. Did you ever listen
Yeah.
to that?
Yeah, but this is like a proper serious album. Like it's
Okay,
8 songs
and so
it's-
like you've written
yeah.
the lyrics and you're doing the vocals and the whole 9 yards.
Yeah. These are old songs. Like they're all like 6-8 years old, and I've worked on them, and everyone's been like record them, and now my friend who is a musician properly
Yeah.
has a recording studio here, so he's producing it.
Oh, very
And
cool.
I'm quite glad. That's why I was saying like I might come to Delhi still in.
When
the
you
next
said
month.
album, I was under the impression it was like a comedy album, like you were going to do like a comedy album, and
It would be
I didn't
weird with
realize-
7 people.
It would be weird with 7 people, but nonetheless, weirder fucking comedians do weirder shit than that. So I was like, Akash is a fucking entourage, man. He's gonna come with 7 people. So yeah, okay, very nice. I'm impressed, man.
Anyway, welcome to the podcast. I don't know if you got a chance to see any of the other episodes before
No,
we did this.
I didn't.
That's how I
Was
like
that
it.
bad?
Then I can corner you.
Oh, okay, good.
Because I
Alright,
realized
fine.
recently this is just a process of doing the same thing with different people every week almost, right? Like it's just I do the same thing, but you change. Like the person on your end changes.
It's like having
Just-
sex with many different people. You're still the same person doing your same old shit, and the
Yeah.
other person's bringing the newness to the game.
The variety to the entire situation. Yeah.
Yes.
I feel I was gonna go with it's like a meditation,
Yes,
but
it's also like a
works.
meditation. Look, if you take sex seriously enough, it's like meditation, okay?
That I would not know about.
I also don't know what I'm talking about half the time, but
Last time I was watching for the dare I call it research for this. I was watching one of your news laundry wala interviews that you did.
Oh, yeah,
Like,
that
4
was a
years
long
back.
time ago. Yeah.
When your book had come out and half your mouth was swollen and frozen.
It was the
And-
worst fucking interview ever. Like, as in, I'm very fond of the news laundry people, so that was obviously, I knew it was going to be in that way, like a
Yeah.
perfectly fine interview. But I didn't realize I was going to be so out of it in terms of like, do you know that I was drooling during, I was drooling. Because you drool when you've got so
Yeah,
much
yeah, yeah.
Novocaine in your fucking mouth from a dental procedure. And I'm like, oh my God, it was the worst. And also,
But you made it.
Yeah.
You made it through all right. I think. It
Yeah,
was,
yeah,
it was
yeah,
not
totally.
so bad. I remember he was asking you this question about does your husband not mind the jokes, and it took me back to the same thing with my parents, where because our answers was obviously the same, because it's always the same with comics, because it's not my dad I'm talking about, it's dads, and
Yes.
this my dad is a stand-in for dads.
Absolutely. And
But
it's-
what about when it is real?
Okay, so
Does
here's
that
the
ever-
thing. No, but that was a fair question, because see, the thing is, I think when it's stand-up comedy, it is totally a stand-in for husbands. So I've had that experience where after a show, couples have come to me and whatever, they've laughed, and the husband's always been like the man of the couple, like the male. He's like, your husband's a very brave man. And I'm like, no, you ass. I'm talking about all fucking husbands. Why do you think your
Yeah.
wife laughed so fucking hard? It's not like a specific thing my husband does. It's like all you guys do the same fucking shit.
Yeah.
So none of you are liberated, no. That's true. That part's true. But the thing with the book, I think, is that those were specific anecdotes that I wrote. And so a few of them, but very few of them, would have been like me, making fun directly of my husband. So that's different. So it's also then, I guess, the kind of different, now you're writing an album, right? So I mean, it just depends on what it is you're doing. The medium sometimes makes the anecdote more specific. But you're
Yeah.
right, in stand-up, of course we're going to draw specifically from our lives and our experiences.
Yeah.
But we're always talking to a broader picture of relationships, right?
Yeah, the masala is always whatever works for everybody. You know what I
Yes,
mean? Like
of
the
course.
tomatoes are from my garden, but I'm
Yes.
still using garam masala that everyone likes.
Absolutely, yeah.
Was it like when you were doing? You started off in. I think you were doing. What did you study in Sophia? That's what.
Oh my
that's the
God.
first thing I need to know, because after that you went and started selling credit cards. So
I did. So I did economics in Sapphires. And by the way,
no wonder, understandable. No, it's
and
okay.
here's the thing. I was like the least academic kid. Like I was always in trouble in school. And when I say in trouble, I was like in serious trouble. Like I even had to leave school after the 10th and go to another school, and that kind of kid. And I remember my parents wanted me to do drama. They were like, you should do something to do with performing arts, because you like that. That's the one area where you seem to take it fucking seriously. And I remember thinking, if they think I should do it, I should not do it. Literally, that was, now when I look back on it. So economics was like a rebellious decision, that I'm going to do something that you people don't think I can do. And sure enough, I couldn't do it. I was horrible at it. I was bored. It wasn't that I was horrible. I was just bored. And I ended up befriending the two, again, by coincidence, just the two smartest, the toppers of our class. The two smart chicks who knew what they were doing became my friends for some reason. And I would just cheat. I would just fucking cheat. I just cheated my way. I had to. I mean, there were some subjects I didn't have to cheat in, but I had to cheat more. I was upset that the final year was a general, a all Bombay University exam where I was sitting next to some rando who I didn't fucking know, and quite far away from him as well. So I had to study, but I didn't care. And so and so then I ended up just doing whatever, right? And that's the kind of life that happens to you when you don't give a shit about your studies, is that you end up taking a job that you get because you applied and you got it, and that was kind of my life.
What was Sophia's like then? Because, so I don't know if you know this, but I got my start at Kaleidoscope, the college fest that Sophia's does.
Really?
Yeah, so it was 18th August 2011, I was there, and that's where I started.
You're such a baby.
Thank you.
I was like 1990 to 93. is when I was in Sapphires. Were you even
that's-
fucking born then?
I was born when you were graduating.
Oh my god, that's wild. That's just wild. Okay, so I was the head of security for Kaleidoscope 2 years running because I was so fucking good at it the first year, so aggro.
Oh wow.
And see, here's the thing: like I was good at some other stuff, but I just would not take part. I was like, I'm not going to take part with these lame fucking pansies singing and fucking dancing and and being in drama. And I had such a bad attitude. Bombay was, I think, different. It wasn't Sapphires was different. I think you know. Firstly, it was a women's college, so that's interesting. I remember my cousin. Okay, so when my mom and dad were like getting ready to send me to Bombay, my dad's family is from Bombay. He grew up in Bombay. And so my cousins live in Bombay. And one of my cousins, he told my mother, he's like, you know, don't put her in Sapphires, she'll become a slut. This was he was like 18 at the time, like he was in HR college or whatever, and he knew everything, right? So he was like, don't do it, you know, she's going to become a slut. And then I had my dad's brother, his eldest brother, who was like, no, she won't become a slut, she'll become a nun. Like, don't put her into Sapphires, she'll become a... So these were the male figures of my family. Were like, one was like, she'll become a nun, don't put her there. And the other was like, she'll become a whore, don't put her there. And I feel like I was somewhere in the middle, you know.
Yeah.
More
there was room for temperance in the Vaz household as well.
There was. Both my parents were like, I think we'll take our chances.
Yeah.
So because it was a women's only college, there was definitely the nun aspect, you know, it was very strict. And I was in the hostel. I wasn't even a day ski. I was in the hostel. So there was definitely a lot of strictness. And then we were all fucking fudging local guardians' letters and partying. But Bombay itself was a little bit different. And also, I feel like things have just gotten better, you know. Like, I think there's just more opportunity and there's more stuff. Like you said, you know, you got your start in Sapphire College. Doing what, by the way? Doing comedy?
Yeah, my first time doing stand-up was there. I mean, I was always part of Kaleidoscope
we
since
didn't
I
even
was in
have
college.
stand-up in those days. Like, that wasn't like... We had one drama thing, one dance thing, a lot of singing, obviously, a lot of music. It was a lot of music. Like, I remember those days, like, every festival was, like, more a music festival and maybe some artistic stuff here and there and a little bit, like, one drama thing and dance. But it was dance and music is, you know, same. But there was nothing else, no spoken word, none of that shit that you guys have now.
But you were in Bombay for some pretty hardcore stuff. Like, you were there through the 92, 93, you were there in... Yeah, right. Like, how...
Yeah.
I don't know what it was like for somebody who was a student in a hostel at that point. Like, I know what my family was doing at that point as local residents of Bombay.
Yeah.
But what was it like as a kid?
So, I remember what happened. I remember the bomb blasts, okay? So... It was my final year of college, so I was loitering around the hostel and I was talking to this friend of mine and we heard this like low but like boom, you know? And I remember my reaction was, are you fucking like serious? Are some assholes like, you know, like like what the fuck is this firecracker motherfuckers? Like I was like, I just one of those aggro people just like, you know, like get lit over the light, like stupidest thing. And she was like, yeah, weird man. And like in the middle of the day and like whatever. And then we carried on. And within less than 25, 30 minutes, we started to know that there was some shit going down and it was really bad. So they locked the hostel. They were like, okay, everybody who's in the hostel, fucking stay here and start contacting your local guardians to let them know you're okay. So I remember we had one phone in the hostel, okay, one of those pay phones. We had one pay phone. That day we were allowed to use the main hostel line downstairs, I think for free. But the way we all use the payphone also is one person dropped a rupee. It cost a rupee to make a rupee coin in there. And then we wouldn't hang up fully. We just do like the and then the next person make the call. And like there were 50 of us standing in a row, like just calling our local guardians to let them know that, look, we're fine. And that was it. And then it was like, you know, because nothing happened to me and we were so young and kind of stupid, it was also kind of like a bit of an adventure in a way. They locked college down.
Yeah.
They got all the girls back. Like none of the hostel, nothing happened to anybody that I knew. And then the next day onwards, the city was on fire. I mean, we just were watching. I don't even remember watching news coverage. We didn't have a TV or anything for the girls. So we were I don't even think we got newspapers for a couple of days. The food fucking started to run out. That was one, I don't know if you remember, but the shops were closed. They couldn't do any delivery services into the hostel. I remember there was a meeting for food like rations where we were told, look guys, we all going to be on lockdown for a week. So there was stuff like that was happening that felt very like a wartime situation.
Yeah.
I feel like, back in the day also there were no cell phones and you couldn't WhatsApp your parents and they couldn't call you. And so it was, you felt, but then we were all together also, so you felt safe. But the one thing I remember was this one girl who came to the hostel in like the dead of night. She showed up the next morning. We didn't even know her. A few girls knew her because she was in sociology. I remember that. Muslim girl who wore a burqa. She didn't wear a burqa. She wore like she wore a scarf. She wore a abaya. And abaya and hijab. Like she would wear the gown and the scarf. And she was our age, final year student. And she was the closest I came to like tragedy because her family had to leave under the cover of darkness, like the worst possible circumstances. Her mother, her father, and her brother had to literally run away. And she was put into the Sophia College hostel because she had her final year exams to complete and they wanted her to finish that.
Yeah.
And I remember afterwards thinking, we have such a bad fucking attitude. Like, I've noticed this one thing, and again, I don't want to make this political, obviously, and it's not political, and it's not about religion, it's just about our weird fucking biases. That, we always thought, like, if a girl wears an abaya and a headscarf, like, she's not going to even finish college, she's going to get married. And here you had this family that was in such a fucking chaotic condition, but their big thing was this girl's got to finish her fucking exams. Like, we want our daughter to finish college, in peace.
Right.
And so she came to the hostel, and I remember she was put into the room next to mine because that room had only one girl. And so she shared with her. And I mean, she had frightening stories, man. So, yeah. And then I think everything kind of went back to normal like Bombay does in X number of days. Like I feel in 10, 15 days. Like it was like it never happened or something.
But that's us as a country, right? Like that's always been us. Partition happened, and then we just kind of got to it because we had this whole country to take care of.
Totally.
Like we don't deal with shit. We just kind of like, chalo, ho gaya abhi. Let's move on to the it's like a culture of repression almost.
Yeah.
Do you feel like the discourse around all these things has changed over the years? Like what was the discourse in colleges like when there was communal tension then?
So, I remember having this really big fight with somebody when I was in. So the bomb blast happened in 93, early 93, I feel like. And then Ram Janmabhoomi, like the demolition of the mosque happened the winter before, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
A very good friend of mine came to visit me, and I mean, like we were all college kids hanging out, right? So this guy came to visit me and a couple of our friends, and we were all sort of sitting together in the college or wherever we were and talking. And I remember he told us very fucking proudly that, my uncle has given leave to a lot of his factory workers to go to be part of the to Ram Mandir, to be part of the demolition. Like, it's our belief that it should be done. And of course, me and another friend of mine were so stunned by this, and we ended up having like this fight with him, but we didn't fall out with him. I mean, he didn't give the permission. He was just telling us about what his family was doing, and we ended up having like this argument, and I don't even remember whether he argued with us. It was more like he told us this information and we just freaked out and called his uncle names or whatever. And my experience of life with all these things is also weird. Like, I come from this family, like my dad's sister is married to a Muslim, and so I have Muslim cousins.
Because you're a defense kid, right? Like, I mean, to a great extent.
I am. I'm a completely a defense kid. Completely a defense kid. And even, I said, my family dynamic is very much that it's mixed. So I think for me, that was a moment in time where I had a couple of like actual relatives that I was worried about. But again, not worried about, because they lived in Bombay and they lived in Bandra, and then you sort of think that we are not like that, and it's outside,
Yeah.
the discourse was not,
Well,
it wasn't that open.
The reason I ask is because like everyone around me right now is all like, oh man, everything is so binary now. And I kind of, sometimes I read old newspaper headlines and I feel like I think it was always binary only. It's just that
It's
now
always
you have
been
Instagram.
binary. I was just going to say that. I think that
Yeah.
these things are always, at a larger level, these things are always binary. Always. I mean, I don't know anything that's not. Like, I think even I lived in the States for a long time, and issues there were very, they would polarize people. But
Right.
I think it appears to look worse right now because of social media. And because we pay so much attention to social media.
Yeah. All right, I was going to ask you this the last time. अभी ये बीच में सब troll bill किया सबको.
Yeah.
Did you just switch off your Twitter for a week and chill, or did you reply to people?
No, so the funny thing is, I went off Twitter about a year ago because I was going through my own personal shit, had nothing to do with any trolls or anything. But Facebook and Twitter, I was like, I'm done for now. I can't be bothered. I don't want to have one extra thing to worry or think about. And I'm just
Yeah.
going to be like fun on Instagram. And then I came back onto Twitter this year, and within a couple of weeks, all this shit happened, or months or whatever, it happened. So this trolling happened, and I didn't switch it off, Akash, because I think, like I said, you were born the year I graduated college. And I think being 47 years old sometimes does make things just not that fucking scary anymore. Or that intense. Like, I talked to a couple of people. Like, I talked to Agrima, and she's like a young woman. Like, I think about her getting rape threats and me getting the same threats. It's not cool, but it's also not the same thing.
Right.
And I think there were a couple of things. One is, the trolls didn't know physically where any of us were,
Yeah.
which is very different from when all of us were going to live shows.
Yeah.
So there felt like less of a panic in my heart. And I didn't go off it. And I wanted to see what it was that was going on, because it wasn't only trolls. It was also, it felt like a lot of people who had like hundreds of thousands of Twitter followers and seemed to be like, I mean, Ashok Pandit, like random people, like some lawyer guy with like hundreds of thousands of followers is like, I'm going to file an FIR against Radhika Vaz. I'm like, do you think anyone cares? I did call a lawyer friend though. That's the one thing I did do. I'm like, look, I just want you to look at this stuff and just tell me, am I in any? He's like, no, don't worry about this. And he explained it to me very calmly. He's like, look, first of all, everyone can file an FIR. Until the cops actually contact you, it's nothing.
Exactly.
And even if they do contact you, they're just contacting you to let you know this is happening, at which point you are allowed to go. And you haven't killed anyone, so it's not that type of an FIR. You go, you hire a lawyer, and then we'll handle it. And he said, they're trying, what are they filing it even for? There's no grounds. And he explained to me that, a lot of this stuff it's very hard to prove malice. Like, how are you going to prove that I have malice towards Hindus? How are you going to prove
Exactly.
that? So, I'm married to a Hindu. Like, how do I bear malice to an entire group of people? So, whatever. So, once I had that one conversation, I stopped feeling like any weird, like any fear. And I think then it just became me just fingering some of the trolls back. And I would check and see. So if someone had like 1 follower, 0 followers and hadn't got, then I just knew it was either some sort of bot or part of some troll army rubbish, and I wouldn't care. But yeah, and it all died down in 10 days. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a resounding thing, right? Like you are not more important than the news cycle, no matter what you've done.
Of course not. And I think that, like I said, you also we all have to look at what we're giving importance to in our lives. Because I think if you focus a lot on social media and what's going on there, then it does become your world, and it can start to get very intense.
Yeah.
But if we don't only look at social media and we get our information from the rest of the world, more, people and experiences and talking to people. So, like, one of the things I did a lot of before we all got locked down and life became this weird fucking cloistered existence was, like, you talk to people who aren't you about who's in, the government. You talk to people who aren't you about stuff. And even though my Hindi is weak and shit like that, I'd always like try and engage, like, my cleaning lady or my cook or anybody like an Uber driver. And I think because I'm a woman, they don't feel like, oh, if I tell her this, she'll get angry and beat me or something like that. They're like, she can't do anything, so I'll just tell her. And I'm not going to start fighting with the Uber driver if he has a different political view from mine, but I just want to hear it out. And it's interesting because he and I don't belong to the same group of humans. We're not going to have the same criteria when we make choices. So I feel like, when you just broaden your horizon a little bit, everything starts to fucking calm down a bit. But when everybody's on the same platform and you're all following each other and you've got sort of the same assholes following you and abusing you and you're following the same, you're self-selecting. I'm going to follow all the people who think like me. I'm not going to follow a bunch of people who think the opposite of me. So, and again, that's probably a good idea. Like I have friends who follow, who go out of their way to follow people who have a very different political view from them. But I'm like, I already know those people exist. Why do I want them on my fucking Instagram feed?
Yeah. Well, my logic is I stopped following almost anyone I know personally. Like I only follow people who I don't know.
I actually like that. Like I feel like Instagram for me is like my Facebook used to be, which is a lot of my friends and stuff like that. But I almost feel like with Twitter, I don't have that many friends on there. It's more like, okay, people that are in comedy and news and that kind of stuff. Actors or whatever.
Was it... Why did you move back to India? Well, who does that? That's a bad move. Why you did?
I know. Why
Especially when, as an improviser, I mean, have some shame. What prompted you?
I know.
and back in like the early 2000s, right? Like...
No. I moved back to India in 2013. I moved
That's
to
even
the States.
worse.
I know, I agree. My husband and I talk about this a lot because I think, we felt like, I'll be honest, I felt like I had a better chance of making financially. I still worked, by the way. I mean, I was working, I had a job till I came back in December of 2013, like literally at the end of the year. And I had a job in New York until almost the middle of that year.
What did you do?
And so I worked for an insurance company, brief. I worked in advertising for a really long time and then I worked in insurance. Yeah, I've been married now for like 15 years.
Was that a love marriage?
I
don't think that's a stupid question asking you. Knowing you, I don't think...
It was a love marriage. It is now a hate marriage. No. But, no. Yes. But I think a large part of our moving back was, financial. I did believe that I could at least not have to work a day job as a comedian in India. I would get, I was already getting little offers while I was there to do like a little corporate thing here, corporate thing there. And, that pays something, man. It's not like, you can live. You can live, I'm not saying it's amazing, but at least I didn't have to take on another job. So that was, the driver. And I did also believe that there was something going on here that was kind of special. And, there are a lot of women in New York itself, just that one city, who talk about stuff that I was talking about. But when I came back to India, I realized, especially at the time, it's changed now.
Yeah.
It's definitely changed now, and God bless that. But at that moment in time, it was a bit of a splash of cold water, in a sense, to hear a female say whatever I was saying. It isn't anymore, and that's the way it should be. But in that moment, it was.
So interesting. Like, it's interesting to me because every interview that I see of yours, okay, it's like, and this is one thing I've noticed with a lot, not just female comics, but male comics, just a lot of comics. I see the old interviews and the fucking interviewers are asking all the fucking wrong questions. Like, I'm like, I've met this person in the green room. There are way more interesting things to talk about here than what is it like to be, like, why are you talking about sex? What is this boobs? And like, it's just like fucking, can you know what I mean? Like, it's, how is that the most important thing? Can we talk about technique? Look at the technique. मतलब बबला बोला पर कितना मस्त बोला यार तू जरा वो तो देख, like कितना सही technique है. And it's.
I
and,
don't think, you know what it is though. No, but but I thought about that too. But I do think that one of the issues is that the art form of stand-up comedy is so nascent in a lot of ways, okay, and especially the way it's being done now, that we don't have a big group of journalists covering that. It's
Yeah.
not like you have experts in the area. Like, it's very unfair almost to judge, because, you know, like, think about it, Rolling Stone magazine, okay, and that's like the most like fucking mainstream now. There are these niche magazines and blog sites and journalists that are interviewing musicians, and they have so much info. They're like musicians themselves almost, or they're like comedians themselves almost. So we don't have that yet, but it's developing, and that's why sometimes these types of interviews are better done by comics or by people who are doing it
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah, I think it's also like for me, the whole fun of this is like it's almost self-documentation. Like I have full intent to come back to you in 3 years and have an interview again and just be like, hey man, it's been a while.
Yeah.
You know, let's go over everything
Totally.
again once.
Yeah.
But so you got married in the States.
Yes.
I'm just trying to clear timelines because I fucking suck at remembering
Yeah,
stuff.
please.
Okay. So you went, you worked here, then you went there, you studied theater there, then you got married there, then you came back. And what does your husband do?
Okay, so basically this is what happened. No, so I was my husband and I met in India. We met in Bangalore. He was, I mean, we were, how old would we have been? 26 or so. So around 26 we met. We both lived in Bangalore at the time, and then I moved to Chennai because I got a job in Chennai. So I moved to Chennai, worked in advertising. I was there for 2 years. During my second year in Chennai, he moved to the States. So he moved to New York. And it was then, you know, why doesn't he want to marry me? The whole 9 yards. And he didn't want to fucking marry me. And then I was like, okay, I'll just go to America. I'll just show up over there, and then he'll have to marry me. That was my agenda. So I went to America. I went to Syracuse University for a year because I got in because it was, you know, I didn't have relatives in the States, so I didn't know anything about the States at all, right? So the only thing I did know was people go and study there, like a lot of graduate students, right?
Right.
So I had a friend in advertising in Chennai who had got into University of Texas in Austin into like an advertising master's. So I was like, oh, there is such a thing. So I just basically went to the American consulate in Chennai. And I leafed through their college like brochures, and I found 4 or 5 places. I applied to them. I got into 2. I got into all actually, but I got aid from only 2. And I took the one that gave me full like financial aid. And I went to Syracuse University to do a media studies program.
That's way harder than it sounds. They're making it sound like, I woke up and I brushed my teeth and I went to the States.
No. I mean, it was horribly hard. And, you know, everything that you do in your 20s is harder than anything you'll do after that. But you do not even pay it any attention. You're just doing it because you're young and you're dumb and you're full of cum and you just want to go, right? So I don't know how I did it because I studied for the GRE.
Describes me exactly.
Yeah, that describes you, I know. And I did the GRE and the TOEFL and the this and the that. And anyway, so I get my ass to Syracuse. And then I spent that 1 year basically looking for an advertising job in New York. And then I moved to New York. And then 3 years later, Deepak and I got married. And then we lived there for many years. And around a year after I moved to New York, so in 2000 and I moved in 2000, so 2002, I started just doing improv classes for fucking, because everybody in New York, like anyone I know was doing something else. Like I'd go to a dinner party or I'd go out and everyone would be like, yeah, I'm really passionate about this and I'm doing that. And I felt like a truth. Yeah. I'm like, I'm going to the gym maybe and going to work. And I barely have any friends here. And I'm in New York and what's the point? And so I was like, I'm going to do something. I'm not going to be boring anymore and embarrassed of myself. And so I was like, oh, I want to do acting classes. I remember thinking that. And so I went to a school that a friend of mine told me about, Indian guy who I'd met. And I ended up accidentally. I went to the school to get a brochure, and there was a big poster of this woman from LA who had come, and she was doing improv classes, and they were like really publicizing her classes, and she was doing a free class that night, and I ended up taking that class, and I'm like, oh, fuck, this is awesome, and it just sort of like I got into it from there.
Yeah. And then this is 2000 and you said
This was 2000 and like I want to say 2003, early 2003 maybe. Like it was cold, so it was either late 2002 or early 2003, sort of like that
Okay.
winter.
Oh man, I'm just trying to pan what I was doing, and I think I don't even wanna. Okay,
You were
But actually,
learning how to
I was
jerk
doing
off.
cool shit. No, I was doing actually pretty cool shit. Huh? I was in 2002. I was 9 years old, and I went to Europe to do dancing.
That is
as part of a
wild. Oh my
yeah, it's a
God.
folk dancer. Like a really imagine like a really short, really chubby gulab jamun kid, you know, with the skin tone to match, and just like dancing like Kohli style. And I used to do all that as a kid.
That is solid. That is
I used to do
solid.
bhangra, and then they used to make me the bell and all. It was quite fun.
That's crazy.
Was it? You must have done the clubs in New York. Like, you must have been doing the open mic wala run there at first,
No, I didn't do any
Like
open
when you
micing
started?
because I didn't want
or
to do
just
stand-up.
improv.
It was just improv, and then I think I did improv straight for like, I was working full time as well, so I think I kind of did improv just, and I never thought I would. Can I be honest with you? I started doing improv, and I did improv straight for like maybe 2-3 years. I started doing sketch comedy. That was when I started to
You
feel
had that
like
series, no? Shugs wala.
Shugs and Fats I did late. Yeah, exactly.
Shugs
So
and
that was
Fats.
part of Shugs and Fats. So that was part of writing sketch. But I started probably writing sketch around 2005, 2006, like really getting into it. And it was like SNL and Mad TV and like going to UCB and watching like Aziz Ansari and his sketch group and feeling like, fuck, who are these geniuses and whatever. Not Aziz, but like everybody, him and everyone else. But like I got into sketch, and it was around then that I started to think, oh, like, people do this. Regular people actually finally can do this. And so I started tentatively sort of like doing more stuff, like organizing shows and, like when you start out, right? Like you organize your own fucking open mics, and we were organizing our own, like not open mics, but like sketch open mics or whatever,
Yeah.
monologue open mics and, all of that stuff. So I started getting into it around 2006 or so. And I also started teaching improv around that time.
Right.
But I always felt like I would be very sort of cottage industry level, like, and I feel like that about myself even now. Like I feel like it's always going to be more like more intimate, like kind of on that scale of intimacy. And I really enjoyed it, I have to say, because I don't know, I guess I was meeting all those people. It's the first few years of when you're doing something that you fucking love, and it's so magical, man. And everything feels fresh and new, and you're always thinking about it. You're not jaded at all. And I took a lot of classes at that time, but I never thought of doing stand-up. I only started thinking of doing stand-up after I did my first monologue show, because that's when I realized maybe I can travel to India and perform there. Because at the time, we still weren't sure when we would move back to India. And I wanted to perform in India only because I just felt like, that's where I'm from. You can live, when you go as an adult, I think, to any country, you're always from your home country. So for me, even though I had lived there for 10 years at the time, I just felt like this yearning to be like, I want to go perform in India. I've heard this comedy there, and I want to go see what it's like. And I feel like I can have something to say, and I want to say it there. So I came and did my first show in India, I think in 2011 or something like that, 2010, 2011. And the only reason I got into stand-up was because every freaking journalist, again, refused to call it a monologue show, because it was a monologue, it wasn't stand-up.
Yeah.
But they just called it stand-up, and it got promoted as stand-up because nobody knew what else to call it. And I just became a stand-up comedian. And then my second show, and since then, I think I've kind of been like, okay, fucking own it then. Like, I guess that's what you do.
Yeah. But like, do you remember the last time we were on a lineup together?
Wasn't it?
I think it was Gurgaon, or was it Mumbai Canvas? It was a Canvas only, I remember.
I feel like I did your open mic at Social.
हाँ वो सब तो ठीक है. But like as a weekend.
May have been Gurgaon. No, may have been Bombay. Yeah, I haven't performed in Gurgaon for the longest time.
Must have been Bombay. You were doing this bit.
Was it Bangalore? Wait a minute. Was it Bangalore?
No.
Must have been Bombay.
Could be.
No, it must have been Bombay.
Yeah. Doesn't matter. All these places are shut now. They're all gone.
It's so fucking true. It's gone. What the fuck?
You were doing this bit about fidelity and marriage. I don't know if you remember that bit.
Yeah.
And you were just workshopping it, and I watched it, and I remember I've never had such a seesaw reaction to a set in my life before. Because I remember I saw it the first night and I hated it, and I didn't tell you anything because I was like, she's a nice person. Why I don't want to spoil what we have here. And then I watched it the second night, and it's like something clicked in my head, and I just kind of like synced into it because your style has this. You have a gravitas to what you're saying all the time. So it's like sometimes you're joking and I'm laughing, but at the same time I'm also in my head going, man, but that's fucking serious shit, dude. Like now I know I'm gonna have this in my head for the entire trip back, and it's not gonna let me go. And I almost start regretting the ride back home already while I'm laughing at the bit because it's so ridiculously real. And I don't think that's the average that you're taking of an audience and relationship. That is definitely personal.
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
like it reaches that point, right? And so what I'm trying to get at
but again,
do you talk about this? So do you talk about this because you're dealing with it? Do you talk about it after you're done dealing with it? At what stage? For me, it's like I start talking about it when I'm dealing with it right in the middle of it, and then I don't do it for a while, and then once I've dealt with the situation, then I go back to the jokes or whatever the fuck, But like, do you have a limit in your head, like where like you're like, let me resolve this and then go on stage and talk about it?
I think if it includes somebody else, I prefer to resolve it and then move on. So, infidelity, things like that in marriage. Yeah, I prefer that we resolve it and then I can speak about it because I am not only talking about myself, I am talking about the feelings of another person, right? Having said that, menopause is something I am going through and I don't give a shit. That I'll talk about as it's happening, and that's why I didn't wait on that, for example. But definitely anything to do with my marriage, I am going to wait until there's some amount of comfortable distance in my head. Now, I haven't exactly cross-checked, and that's where it's like, have you checked with your husband? I don't exactly cross-check with him, but I feel like, if I've got some amount of closure on it, I'm pretty sensitive in that way, I think. We do see therapists and whatnot, so I do also know it's not like I'm off in my silo doing whatever. But I was just going to say that, there is the element of specificity that I did deal with that issue. But what fucking marriage has not, to be honest. I think it would be
that's
bizarre.
Why they laugh, right? Like,
exactly. So
that's why they laugh always.
Yeah. So I think that some and you know what's interesting, and this is why I think it starts to become easier as you get older, is that you start to realize everyone deals with the same shit more or less. So it's not some shameful corner that you have to hide in and not talk about it. It's like almost every marriage is going to be touched by the same shit. Almost. And if not your marriage, then definitely your sisters, your brothers, maybe your parents, a close friend. Yeah. So these are not unusual things. I have a friend, Hannah Gatsby did it, but I have a friend in New York who talked about being raped. She didn't talk about, she talked about date rape in college, and I just remember having this.
Hey, 1 second, Radhika. All the dogs in the lane have decided to
I can hear
lose
them.
their shit. Yeah.
Well, I
don't know if it's like a Gujarat thing, but like the dogs here are really fucking bored, dude. Anybody even walks by, they lose their minds.
I think it's a Gujarat thing. No, I'm just kidding. They're all dogs. When stray dogs, they are waiting. They are bored. I mean, they are kind of bored, and I think they are waiting for someone to walk by or drive by, and they can lose their minds.
Anyway, you were saying.
I've listened to sets where, like you said, I have a friend who was doing a set on being raped in college. And how she was convinced that because it was sort of date rape, it wasn't really rape, and sort of her recognition of what had happened to her.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I saw the set, I was like very quiet after. And also thinking of all the things that have happened to me. And to be honest, to people I know, but mainly to me. And I'm like, fuck, do I have to think about this now? Like what you were saying, you're almost regretting the drive back. I was like, I'm going to be sitting with the set for a minute. But I think that's somewhat you know what? People ask me, what's your agenda when you go on stage? I was recently asked that question. What's your agenda? I'm like, my agenda is to make people laugh. I mean, I know that I talk about a lot of heavy stuff, and I know that I skew very much to the personal traumas, but I still want people to laugh like that. I still want that, and I don't get it every time, but that's still my number one fucking reason. Like, I want, if Akash is in the I want to hear that ridiculous laugh. You have a ridiculous laugh, and I want to hear it. Like, I want to fucking hear it. So I feel like no matter what we talk about, we still want to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really have much of a choice either, right? Like, I feel like comedy comes with that precondition. You have to really, really fucking hit it out of the park to get away without laughs.
Yeah.
Like,
I agree.
I like that. Like, I don't know if this sounds nice, but or right rather, but I feel like craft is creativity with restrictions.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally. I mean, imagine if we had no restrictions, it would be like one long, boring open mic at some point.
Which is most open mics anyway.
Yes.
But
they're open mics for a reason. I think it's annoying to see a lazy comedian. There's nothing more annoying than seeing laziness in a craft. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't mind seeing someone who's not talented. But when you are fucking talented and you know it and you're just not bothering to hone it a little bit, like, why are you doing that?
Yeah, I think it's most people don't realize that consistency is more important than talent.
Yeah, absolutely. Hard work pays off much more than talent does. And I think I've gone through cycles of taking things for granted a little bit. And maybe not because I thought I was good, but more because I was trying to do too many things. And so I was like, okay, I have to do all of these things because I need to make the money. So I'm just going to put a little bit less time towards this stuff, and it doesn't work like that. It can't.
Yeah. Okay. Of the last, it's like the one thing I realized talking to people who doing this for over a decade is that you don't just do stand up. You can't just do stand up. You have to do 5-10 things in order to keep your mental peace around. Otherwise, I think you tend to go a little crazy just telling jokes on stage.
Yeah.
Because at some point I realized last year that the most conversation I would have was with audiences, not even with friends or family, because I was constantly touring.
Yeah.
And you start thinking that that's actually a conversation, but it's not, because it's not. It's a show.
And I can't hear you, Akash.
You know what I mean? You're stuck. Okay, now you're back.
No. Now I can hear you.
Okay, I was saying you start to think that's an actual conversation.
Yeah.
The show that you're doing. And for me, it became like this. I got to the point where I don't even do material a lot of the times anymore. Like, it's just become, I just want to go and tell you what happened in the last 1 week, and that's today's 30 minutes is that now. Deal with it. I'll crack a joke or two at the end. It'll be fine. I know I'll be fine. But I feel like if I don't force myself to just go and now just talk, I don't think I'm going to get any better. Your set seems to be the kind of set which is genuinely well thought out and written out. I know for a fact you have a word file somewhere or a notebook somewhere with words put on in a permanent way, right? I don't know. Is that I think, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's like, it doesn't show with the stand-up. It doesn't come across with the stand-up in the sense that you're still able to do the thing. Like, I know if you just go on stage and start talking about the last week you had, it's going to be hilarious. Right now, I already write on stage and it's a challenge. But you're like writing in a notebook and you're still able to pull it off. Is there something you're doing there? Is there like, do you go back to old material in the middle, beach mein? I know this is like a weirdly nerdy, geeky question, but I just feel like you're one of those people who does it very smoothly and you've been doing it long enough.
It's always a mix, right? Like, I think depending on what I want to do, in the last year, obviously until this shit happened, everything is going to be in the last year until this shit happened. I wanted to start writing new stuff. No, it's not in the last year, but there'll be phases where I want to write new stuff, and there'll be phases when I want to just fall back on the old crap, and then, you know, and so yeah. So when but I am a writer, so I think I like to prepare, and, you know, speaking of nerdy, I'm very nerdy. I think I like to write it out and prepare it, and I like to know the order in which I'm going to say the jokes and how they're going to sound, and I keep making changes, and I have fucking cue cards, and it's all there. I do think that improv helped because I did improv for so long, Akash. Like, that's my base as a comedian. I think.
But that's so weird to me, because all the things you do in improv are the opposite of the things you do in stand-up.
I agree with that. I agree with that in terms of as a writer. But I think as a performer, see, stand-up to me is always two things. It's your material and it's your delivery. So, for example, I think that sometimes I watch someone like you, okay, who will fucking not give a shit about material, and you're like just telling people what the fuck happened, and your delivery is so strong that you can carry that off. I have seen people who try to do what you're doing, and their delivery is just not there for that type of material. It's a type of material at the end of the day, talking about your week. Because you are talking about your week, but you're talking about specific things that you have somewhat thought about. You may not have put pen to paper, but, you know, we all have, it's still a way of writing.
It's a lifestyle.
Yeah. And I think that delivery is such a big part of what we do, right? Because I've heard some really good jokes. I've seen some comics with amazing jokes and really bad delivery. I haven't always seen the other way around, where someone's got amazing delivery and shit jokes. I mean, I don't know how that can work, but I've seen some comics.
That's interesting you bring it up, because I don't think it's possible.
I don't think that's possible, right?
Even if your joke is just screaming one word over and over again, you really need to know what word it is. You really need to know how to set it up.
Exactly. So I just feel like I said, I think that even when you say that you're just talking about your week, I think you've got a strong delivery style, but I think there's something about what you're going to tell the audience that in some fucked up your world, your mind, there's a method to that madness. There has to be. So
yeah,
I think in my case, I write it. And then, so I think for me, what happens is, because I've been doing improv for so long, there are little things in improv that have seeped into how I deliver material. And I think that may be what makes it look a certain way on stage, even though it's like, I know the lines and I know every fucking thing, and so maybe that slight freshness aspect can come from that.
Why don't you, did the idea come across कि इंडिया में improv करके देखते हैं?
Yes, it did, but it fizzled out almost as soon as the idea came to me. I did a couple of long ago.
Was anyone willing to rehearse with you? I think
it wasn't even that. No, it was even before that. So in 2008, I came to India, and I did a bunch of totally on the down low. I only did it in Bangalore, and then I did it for Big FM. You remember Big FM, the radio company?
Yeah.
So I knew the guy who is a friend of mine. Who I can't remember if he was like the CEO or the CTO. Like, he was a senior guy at that time with Big FM. It's a very young company. And because he was my friend, he was like, hey, will you do like improv for my radio jockeys? Because it felt like a good skill to sort of teach them. And I was like, awesome, I'll totally do it. I'm coming to India anyway for 3 weeks. I'll totally do it.
Yeah.
And I remember at the time, two things occurred to me. And I remember telling him this. I was like, first of all, I don't speak fluent Hindi. And I think for improv to be really hot in India, it needs to be in Hindi. I really believe that. I think that
Which is
improv's
still not the
amazing.
case, unfortunately.
Yeah, but I think
For the
that's
most
also
part.
because there aren't that many improvisers. See, stand-up comedy has a very specific. It makes more sense for it to be more popular. It's easier to put together. You don't have to do rehearsals. Blah blah blah. Improv makes less money anywhere in the world, so that's a starting point. Okay. So that's not going to be different in India. But on top of that, if you're this niche fucking English speaker, it's going to be that much harder. So my first reaction, and the good thing was Big FM had multi-language, and I remember doing a workshop in Delhi for the Delhi office was one day, and then the Jaipur offices were the next day, and I'm glad that they're such basically smart, talented human beings in our fucking country. Honestly, they helped me put the workshop, because I remember coming to them and being like, okay, guys, we're going to have a problem because my Hindi is not great and you guys are going to all be performing in Hindi. So we're going to have to work out how I give you feedback. So it was a thing that happened, but it really made me conscious of the fact that for improv to be hot in India, it'll have to, I think, be first of all in Hindi. And until someone who is a good improviser takes the trouble to start rehearsing in Hindi, improv's always going to be super, super, super niche. And I knew that going in, which is why I never even bothered to try it. I always latched on to whoever else was doing improv. So I remember Kanis and all were doing improv, and I was always happy to be invited to their jams and whatnot, but I never tried to do it on my own.
When you say you're not good at Hindi, usually like what is Vaz is what, you're South Indian? Is that?
Vaz is Goan and my mom's South Indian.
Okay.
So my dad's Goan, my mom's South Indian, and that is why they only spoke English at home. So I don't really have a strong second language.
Ah, that explains it.
Yeah.
Oh no, your video has frozen somehow.
Say that again?
Your video has frozen.
Oh shit, and yours too, man.
Oh, my connection is unstable, it seems. Y'all ordered food? Wow, these the bandmates have all ordered food, it seems. Okay, wait, I don't know why this is behaving the way it is behaving. Allow me to fix this. Okay, there you are.
Yeah.
Here we are again.
Yeah. Okay, done.
We were talking
Hindi.
about shit.
Hindi.
So there was no English, Hindi at home. But school maybe there was no Hindi.
There was, but I went to school in the south, and it was not a language I heard being spoken on a. You know, you have to hear a language being spoken regularly to actually speak it well, and to think in it. So, like for example, now that I live, I married a North Indian. And my mother-in-law and a lot of people decide all speak in Hindi predominantly only. And so, you know, if I spend a couple of weeks with my in-laws, my Hindi just gets better because that's all I hear them speak. And I love just watching the people behind you, by the way.
I've given up.
No, there's nothing.
This is the first time there's movement in my frame. Usually the other person has either a dog or a cat or a child or something popping.
So that was kind of it. And then I moved abroad. I lived in Chennai. I lived in the south for most of the time, and then I moved to the States. So I reconnected with Hindi after coming back through my in-laws and whatnot. And I'll drift into very if I'm doing a character who speaks in Hindi, I'll take the trouble to make sure I'm saying the words properly. I'll check with people and whatnot. But it's not something that comes super naturally to me. And I don't understand it when it's being spoken at a higher, better level. So if I have to judge for improvisers who are doing a kick-ass scene in Hindi, I can't really tell them anything because I'm not really getting, it's tough, man. You to give feedback. So that was why for me, improv just never felt like it would be a thing I'd get into.
Right. Hey, just 1 second.
Can
you give the GoPro ka other battery upar se? This is the first time I have shot the GoPro to 0 battery myself. I'm very happy. You know, the one thing I've learned from this pandemic above all other things is that if you just make things and not worry about how they look or sound at the end, like the audience couldn't care less whether it looks or like a fucking movie or not. You know what I mean?
Totally. I feel like You know, when I first there are some shows. I had a friend who worked for the BBC long ago, like in 2002, 2003. And I mean, she didn't even work for the BBC. A friend of hers worked for the BBC in London. And she would get DVDs of shows that weren't even made yet. Okay? And they were like the preliminary recordings of stuff that became bigger shows. But it was on the basis of those little recordings that they would choose the talent. And the recordings were so bad. The sound was shit, the visuals were shit. But it doesn't matter because you have to be a real dick to care about that at a certain level. You know what I mean? Like at a certain point, but that in a way, but you know what irritates me? And that's why so many movies do so well, because they just, production values are so good and everything else about them is crap. The acting is crap, the script is shit, the direction is boring, everything is bad, but the production money is so much that people are like, arey, amazing, amaze.
Yeah. But you wanted to be an actor also, no? Like that was the plan, that was the agenda actually.
That was the original fucking plan. Yeah.
Yeah. Has there been a lot of iterations to plans?
I think
since comedy became the main plan, or is it the main plan?
I think again, I didn't necessarily want to write a book. It happened because I was blogging and an editor saw the blogs and said, why don't you do this? And I did it. I have a tendency to not stick to a plan, and I don't know how good that is, but in a way it's given me an opportunity to do a lot of shit that I wouldn't have done and learn things as I went along. So again, like you're saying, just do it, man. I felt like that about the book. I'm like, I don't know how to write these long format essays, but okay, let's just do it, man. With Shugs and Fats, I mean, we just got hold of this. We put an ad out or something. I can't even remember. Oh, a friend of mine was doing a show. Nadia was doing a show, a play, and the director of the play was like, oh, I know a bunch of like a director. Like I know a cameraman. I know an editor. And we were like, let's just do it. Let's just improvise some shit and see what. Of course, the editing took forever, but you just do stuff and it becomes, sometimes it becomes something, sometimes it doesn't, and it's cool. It's always something. I don't know. I mean, I think that I'm becoming more and more intrigued right now with being behind the camera, like not behind the camera, behind the scenes, let's say that. So I love stand-up, okay? I fucking love it. I mean, I never thought I'd be a stand-up comedian. I never wanted to. I used to think I used to meet stand-up comedians in improv classes and think they were the biggest assholes. I'm like, these people are, they're like so self-centered. Yeah, self-centered and totally, like I had all the negatives, right? And then I started doing it and I'm like, oh my God, it is so much fun to be standing up there on your own, fucking telling people how it is and what you think and dying and doing well sometimes and all of it. Like it's all good, right? So I think that for me, performing is a true love for sure. But I think that this year, especially with everything that's happened, I have always wanted to write for other performers. So whether it's a play or a TV script or a movie script or some kind of a script situation that requires multiple players other than myself, or maybe myself as well, but like to try and get into other characters' heads and stay there, that's something I've not done. And I want to do that. And so that's something I'm sort of putting myself through the paces of right now during the pandemic. Like every day I'll spend maybe 2 or 3 hours a day reading, writing, coming, visual, just doing exercises from different books and I've taken some online lectures and stuff about this kind of writing. It's a different animal.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I had like your diligence, man. Like to take, I can't learn anything in a formal way. I've realized I'm very slow as a learner. Like if I take a course or something, it's always too fast for me. I need 6 months to even like grasp
Oh my
anything
god,
in
no,
my
no, no,
life.
me
Like, I'm very
too.
slow.
Me too. I'm totally slow. Like, this is a learning program that I've kind of devised myself, and it's
Right.
multi-pronged. it's it's essays and blogs written by movie makers and writers. It's what is it called? It's I have the package and I've completely forgotten what it's called. But like Aaron Sorkin and all these people do lectures on that.
Masterclass.
I've taken some stuff from Masterclass, but not a whole heck of a lot, just some stuff. But I've also like totally been distracted and watched like Samuel L. Jackson talk about acting in Masterclass, and I'm like, okay, I don't want to really do acting anymore, but I want to watch Samuel Jackson talk about anything. So I've definitely digressed a bit here and there. I've got a few books that I've gone through. I've also feel like, you know, when you do a lot of stand-up, you do things like think about, you do, you know, you'll be surprised or maybe you won't, but if you were to sit down and write something, I think you'd be like, oh no, I have thought about 10 different characters because I'm watching people all the time to see what the fuck they're going to do next that I can talk about.
Yeah.
So there are certain things that come very naturally to me, and then there are certain structural things that are just like a chore that I have to watch 10 movies and sort of be like, okay, when did the inciting incident happen? Because yeah, I'm not going to do a class now, you know, like, or maybe, I don't know, I'm never going to say never to anything, but you're right, I have a more unorthodox sort of way of going about it. And then you talk to friends who are already doing that work and try and get their feedback and, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah.
It takes about as much discipline as anything else. And ever since I become sober, by the way, I'm talking a lot about like my like I have addiction issues too, which I was totally on a roll fucking doing material, developing that bit, and then the pandemic happened and I'm like, this is the worst year to be sober for one thing. And also I'm having some difficulty developing material in isolation, like I don't know.
Do you also think that Bhubaneswar has the best stuff?
Bhubaneswar has the best stuff?
Have you been seeing the Sushant Singh stuff on the news?
No, I haven't. You know what? I can't. I'm not doing that. I have a friend who's following it like a fucking ferret, and she lets me know when things get out of control. But so now his stuff was coming in from Bhubaneswar, is it?
Like some conversation where Riya Chakrabarti has said to someone, I'm a bounce. I MMA bounce, and they're treating it like proof that she knew that the check that she was gonna write was gonna bounce.
Yeah, I heard that one.
I mean, I've given, like, this is where I have given up. I'm just like,
It's
like this,
insane.
but this is so Fox News, right? Like, this is
It
scary. Like,
is.
but in the US, like for Fox News, there is what's it called, MSNBC or whatever is there. यहाँ पे कोई है ही नहीं.
Yeah, we don't have a response to that. But the funny thing is, everyone's like, who's even watching this? Who are these people who watch Republic? I'm like, there are people. Like, why are we always surprised that there are people watching it? There are people watching it, otherwise it won't be happening, trust me.
अरे अगर ad revenue है तो मतलब लोग देख रहे हैं.
100%, are you kidding me? But I was enjoying developing material on. So addiction may have been one of those topics, by the way, that I had to fully come to terms with it and start to cross over or make the effort to cross over into becoming sober before I could really start writing about it. Not because of anything else, but because I think I was in denial a little bit about it.
Right.
So
What kind of drugs are we talking about, if you don't
Oh
mind me
no!
asking?
For me, it wasn't anything major. It was just smoking. It was just marijuana and alcohol, but it was too much. Anything that's habitual to the point where it's a dependency is an addiction,
Absolutely.
right? So it wasn't cocaine or heroin or anything, but. And it would never have been, because I think I very early on knew that I have an addictive personality, and God forbid I do anything harder than what I was already doing, it would be the end. So
Right.
I've never tried it, and people don't believe this of me. They're like, you've never tried coke? you've never, I'm like, you know what? No, I haven't. And I haven't because I probably enjoy it too much. And at least I
That
know
is-
myself.
Yeah, that is literally the reason why I've also not done it. That is
Yeah.
the exact reason. I know me, the way I'm addicted to getting on stage. Those withdrawals were so hard. You think I could get over a cocaine habit? Not happening.
Yeah. Oh my God,
Yeah.
totally. And even like the adrenaline push of going on stage and doing
I
that.
swear.
That had, by the way, become my stand-in for everything else because I was going to any and every open mic. I needed to go. And
Yeah.
and then it all stopped so suddenly. It was like cold turkey. I'm like, what is this? What is this feeling
That's
of
what-
no excitement and tension? Like, how am I going to live?
At the beginning of the lockdown, I was contemplating quitting smoking as well, and I tried also.
Yeah.
And then I kind of failed very miserably, and my therapist
Yeah.
was like, "Listen, you are already dealing with withdrawal. How much
Yeah.
more withdrawal are you gonna put yourself through? Like, I'm not saying don't quit, but wait a
Yeah.
week, man. Give yourself."
So, it's so interesting because quitting is not. I mean, it's also, I think, I definitely tried to quit so many times before, and it was always me muscling through it. It's like I'm going to quit because I have the willpower, and I couldn't, and it because you have life to deal with, and
Yeah.
this is sometimes a little bit of a coping mechanism, and to try and drop your coping mechanism in a I'm going to like one day that
Yeah.
attitude, it's the same concept of I'm going to squelch this, and
Yeah.
it's not a physical thing, it's a mind thing, right? So you have to almost figure that part out, and so therapy obviously is a major one, but what really helped me was Vipassana. And I don't believe there's one. Everyone is going to have their own way of dealing with their own things because everyone's things are different. But for me, Vipassana worked because the one thing that they say, you know what Vipassana is, right?
Yeah. Did
It's
you do
that-
10 days, 21 days?
10 days. 10 days. And I did it last year in November. End of November. So end of November, early December. And one of the things that I came away, and I didn't do it finally to quit smoking. I hoped that I would have some insight into myself and it would help. But because my therapist had already told me, look, I remember when I started, I've seen therapists multiple times through my life. So the most recent was in September of last year. And I was like, I need to quit smoking, please help me. And he was like,
Yeah.
okay, I would love to help you. But you need to know now that I don't treat people for quitting smoking or quitting drinking or quitting. Like, I can't help you quit something. It doesn't work like that. So I was like, okay. And in a way, I was relieved. I was like, oh, thank God, I can carry on smoking for a few more months. And
Are you completely sober now? No.
yeah.
daru?
No. Everything. And the reason I did it also was because I had done, I had been designing these bespoke fucking treatments for myself where I wouldn't smoke, but I would drink. I wouldn't drink, but I would something else. And I would smoke cigarette. And everything was a clear stand-in for what I really wanted to do, and it would become excessive and just not good, at any level.
Yeah.
So I kind of knew that if I want to really stop, at least for a couple of years, I would have to stop everything so I could even in my head figure out what I was actually addicted to. Like, it's
Right.
unlikely I'm addicted to all of the above. So, but it's all part and parcel of the feeling. So
Yeah.
I knew that it would have to be everything. And it also just takes your mind off the hassle. Yeah. Like, now I know I don't drink or smoke or do anything. So there's no question of this weekend I'm only going to do this and I'm not going to do that and I have to. It's nothing. I can't do anything.
Yeah.
That decision has been taken away from me now,
Right.
So in a way it's hard, but in a way it's really easy. But in Vipassana, the thing that really made me feel better was the guy says that you're not addicted to drugs, which was like, really? But he's like, you're addicted to a feeling or an
And
emotion.
you get it any way you can.
Yeah. There's two things, but he said that either you'll get it any way you can, or you already have that feeling and you're trying to squelch it with these drugs. So
Right.
You're either got a major aversion to something or a major craving to something, and the drugs are this thing that are acting on both sides. So what you actually have to look at is what is that feeling and emotion. And 10 days of silence and really taking it seriously helped me understand that I have a lot of issues around handling anger. So whether
Right.
it's anger coming from somebody else or my own anger, I don't know how to deal with it. It is almost like a block. Like anyone gets angry with me or I get angry with anyone, it's a block. It's almost like this is not happening. It's a denial. And anger is a normal fucking thing. Like you have to deal with it in life.
Do you cut people off when you are angry with them? Is that your usual treatment for when you're mad, or do you let loose on people when
It's
you're
one or
angry?
the other. It's always one extreme or the other. It depends on who the person is and what the circumstances are and how comfortable I feel. But both are bad because in both cases you're not resolving
Yeah.
any issues. You're just either repressing or or losing your shit. So
I've had the third experience in this as well. I do the third thing, which is the worst thing to do. I think worse than both of these, which is I'll be like, it's okay, but I'll keep making fucking jokes around it, like because that's how I process, right? So I'll just keep and I won't let it go.
that's a
know what I
denial
mean?
in a way, right? Like you're denying it, but with the moment you deny something, you're denying it. You haven't let it go. It's not
Yeah.
passed
Yeah.
through your body. So I haven't found the magic bullet to that yet. Like I'm still in the process of examining anger and how to deal with it in a healthy way and how to make it, a good thing and not a bad thing. But
Right.
I definitely realized that was what the issue was.
It's also interesting to me that you said alcohol and pot, but that you use the word drugs to describe both, which I think is something that most people don't realize is how much of a psychotrope alcohol is. I mean, people, it's so normalized, and in
Totally.
India, it's in this weird space where it's taboo, but it's also normalized, but it's always in extremes, and
Yeah.
people don't realize that alcohol is a way more violent drug than even pot is. I mean, even
Pot
with
is
cigarettes.
benign. Pot is the best one, by the way. And by the way, I stand by that. Like, I know that I wouldn't want to talk to an 18-year-old and be like, yeah, keep smoking till you pass out. But everything, you have to know what you're doing in life. Like, you have to grow the fuck up and recognize your shit. That's for sure. But if it's between alcohol, pot, and cigarettes, pot any day of the week, like it's the best, it's the cleanest. If you know your sauce and you're not doing it excessively and you're doing it to socialize or whatever, even if you're doing it to think and chill out, it's a good one. It's actually a good one because it's not harmful. It doesn't have the problem with most pot smokers who have problems, by the way, and this is a fucking fact, is that they also smoke cigarettes. They smoke a lot of tobacco in their pot, so that's a health issue. And then a lot of them are very young and drink as well. So if you only smoked pot, you'd live into your 80s and you'd be an old hippie like fucking Willie Nelson and all the sadhus in Varanasi, and you'd be fine. The problem is that our modern day stoners have a plethora of other shit to go along with it.
That's why but that's the thing, right? Like that's also why pot gets categorized as a gateway drug.
Yeah.
Whereas I think I think cigarettes are really the gateway drug. Alcohol, I think, is even more of a gateway drug, not just to
Alcohol is the
other
number
drugs.
one.
Yeah, not
Alcohol
just to
is-
other drugs, but other very irresponsible behavior that can harm other people.
Dude, I'll tell you one thing. Most of my friends who I know, and this is nothing to do with, this is everything to do with alcohol and drugs. So, to do with drugs, which includes alcohol. I think that especially if you're young, your irresponsible sexual behavior that can get you long-term consequences of disease, okay, or of unwanted pregnancy and then an abortion, and like all the really horrible shit that can happen to a human being, happens when you're drunk. I don't know a lot of stoners who've had, and again, stoners like a heavy duty word for someone who smokes pot like on occasion or to have a good time on a weekend.
Yeah.
Social smokers or whatever. I don't know anyone who's got themselves into that type of trouble. But drinking has made me do the stupidest shit for sure, and I know I'm not alone in that.
Oh yeah. And with alcohol, I was discussing this. It's interesting because the last episode was with Cyrus Brocha, and we were also discussing his alcoholism, and that's when I also realized, Cyrus was talking about how he's an extreme personality. It's either 0 or 100. There's no room for moderation, and I feel like I'm also that kind of person. And we've all been in these, like, I don't know if it's ever happened to you, but there was a point I remember a few years ago where it started. I don't usually drink because I have depression, so there's always that, I'm going to be very careful and choose when I drink. It's only when I'm super happy, it's a very happy occasion, that I don't mind drinking. But it was one of those things, right? Like, it was like a December, and I was like, oh, it's Christmas Eve. I'm not even fucking Christian, but hey, man, addictive behavior, hooray! And so chalo Christmas ke naam pe 1 liter daru piya jaye. And next thing I know, it's February.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and it's been almost every day, every other day, and I think it's encouraged by everyone around you.
Totally.
And I think that in that sense, pot having stigma is also a good thing, because I've been a stoner in my life, and the fact that if I smoke and go to a meeting, it's not going to be perceived as professional, has kept me from smoking a lot of times. But in this industry especially, you are in advertising in the 90s and 2000s, you know what I mean, दोपहर को 2 बजे दारू is like an acceptable situation to be in. And I think that's very scary to me. Like, with alcohol there is too much liberalness, and with pot there's too much vilification.
Absolutely. And actually the more dangerous one to your health is always going to be alcohol. And totally. You're absolutely right. It's unnecessarily tilted in this very stupid way. We get so many of our cues from the West, right? The bloody Western world also has by the way,
they
Indians,
only decided.
They're the ones who decided that pot was going to be a problem. We Indians who smoking pot, why is it a bad thing? Like bhang, I mean.
Did you know that the British had done a survey in 1800s, okay, late 1800s, on the efficacy of a ban on ganja and what it would do to the country of India. These are the people who banned sati.
Yeah.
And they said ganja is too integral to the culture and society of India for us to try and ban it. Okay, okay. So, I mean, it was really in our DNA, and it has been objectified and vilified to the point where it's like just this, I don't know why I said objectified, it is an object, but it's been vilified to the point where it's like this monster thing that will bring ruin to your family. And those old 1920s ads where people smoke pot and then they're eating
nasha dirt, all, like falling all over the place. I think the word drugs also is got this hard feeling, and and alcohol, just like you said, there's that separation, and pot's fallen into, it's a drug, it's not alcohol, and so it goes along with all the other shit, which it totally isn't. Like, I think my mom is one of those people. She's not actually, but I always used to think that she's like, if I tell her I smoke pot, she totally knows everything now. But if I tell her I'm smoking pot or my friends smoke pot, she's going to have like images of like needles and fucking, and it's true. It's unfortunately a lot of people think like that. But like my husband's not an addictive personality, and he has a drink every evening. Every evening he'll have a drink, but he'll have one drink. I can't stop like that.
Then it's the night, like,
right, and then it's like I can't wake up the next morning, and then it'll be like knuckling hard, like being strong about it. So I'm not going to smoke for the whole week. I'm not going to drink this week. But then I'm blitzed on the weekend, and it's like it's too much shit to keep track of. And like I said, I'm 47 now. There's only so many. Like, come on, I have to get a grip.
What do you tell a 27-year-old or a 24-year-old dealing with that, though?
I mean, start with counseling.
By the way, this is not for me. If you're sitting at home and watching
this is not for Akash. He's asking for his friends.
My addictions are very much like controlled. I've been in the therapy long enough. I know what I'm doing now, and it's
it's therapy. I would. I mean, anyone who, if you suspect you have a problem, first of all, you probably do. I think that's the ground rule for addiction. Is that if you think if you are making rules around your usage, you have a problem. That's number one. If you're making any rules around it, that you feel you need. Like, I need to make a rule now that I don't do this during this time or that time. I think that that's already a little bit of a red flag. And if you're getting blitzed on the weekends, you're blacking out, you're doing stupid shit while you're drunk or high or whatever, you feel like you need to do it all the time. Like, oh, you're calm, you're doing it. You're not calm, you're doing it.
Yeah.
Just, I think it's important to be just mindful. I think start with just being mindful. I was so not mindful through my 20s about a lot of stuff. So I didn't even know about, like, I didn't even think I had problems or whatever. I was just, I can knuckle through this, and I can be fine till the weekend. And then the weekend anyway, we all party and go to work on Monday. It's fine. But it's not fine because as you get older, it starts being less and less cute. But that's one.
That's so
like
interesting that you use that phrase, because that's the exact phrase Cyrus used.
As you get older, it gets less cute.
It's not as cute, yeah.
Yeah, it's just not cute anymore. It's obnoxious.
Yeah.
And it's embarrassing and it's just not good for you. So I think it's all of those things. But I think I'm very pro therapy, and I think anytime you feel you have any heaviness around substances, seek therapy, because I think it's really amazing what it can do for you. You know?
That's such a nice warm note.
Isn't it?
Yeah, if only they knew you as a person.
I know. If only they knew us in the green room and the lack of warmth and no.
But I feel like I'm so much closer to comics that I don't know than I am to family that I've lived with all my life.
Oh my God, I swear to God, I literally feel like, I feel like I didn't say that exact thing, but I was this is 3-4 years ago, in a green room. The conversation went from, hi, I'm Radhika, hi, I'm so-and-so, to 20 minutes later, depression.
Yeah.
And I was
time.
like, that's amazing that I didn't even think it was weird, because I've been working with artistic people for so long. I think we do all have a connection. We understand that we're all probably dealing with somewhat of the same stuff that drives us to do some of this shit. And so when it comes up in a conversation, we're not ashamed to admit it or talk about it.
I think it's also like, it's almost like we're all pretending like, oh guys, this is a joke I'm working on. So I know.
Yeah, exactly.
And we try to like take it out through that. But it's an effective tool.
Yeah, it is. It is therapeutic, I think, a lot of the time, right? To write about. I follow this guy on Instagram. He's really funny. His name is Freddie Birdie. He's not a comedian, but he's a writer. And he wrote something. He said, we take photographs of things we want to remember, but we write when we want to forget, which is true. I never want to forget anything, by the way. Like, I feel like I never want to forget anything because I don't know when it's going to be useful to me. But I understand what he means by that, is that, you write so that you can move through it.
Yeah, it's how you process the thing.
Yeah.
It's weird how being on stage and telling strangers about it can become a really great way to process a thing. Because for me, it's like I spent so many years thinking that I was the only person who felt the way I did. Like that alienation is so strong that every time a whole room laughs at the fact that, oh yes, loss, I've felt loss, you have felt loss, and then it becomes like I become more confident with my own feelings, and you start feeling like you're not alone. And I think that's the hardest part in today's day and age.
I agree. I completely agree. I mean, like, I think just the way the world is, and the way technology has evolved, and the way socializing has evolved. It's so cloistered. It's almost like, in the olden days when I was a kid, you went out with your group of friends and you met boys and you could talk about like, oh, what do you think of him and what do you think of... Now it feels like you're on an app and you still have the same thing. You're WhatsApping pictures and profiles to people, but it's not the same thing. So it can lead to in a way it's amazing because I don't know. I love everything that's happening now in terms of the dating life. Like, it just feels like there's a movement forward for our society. Do you think that? Like, I don't know. I'm not young and I don't date, but like, do you feel it's more open for women? You know what I mean? Like,
it's much better for women.
It's
much
right?
better for people like me who have anxiety, who don't have the means to go and talk to a person in public without getting an anxiety attack. It's safer. I think.
It is safer in a weird
comparatively.
way. Yeah, I agree. Like I think a lot of older people are like, you're just going to meet someone online and be like, we used to meet people in bars and restaurants and put ourselves
Exactly.
in there. So it's the same fucking. I think it's not less safe. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the people leave a digital footprint way more now than they used to, you know. So
This is
so
true.
You can look people up, and it's
Yep.
beyond a point. It's very difficult to have a fake profile if you have 6 years of Instagram. You know what? Most my
Yes.
generation is that generation. We all had
Yes.
Instagram in our early 20s also. So
Yes.
it's
And
a
in
little
fact,
hard.
it's a nice warning sign if someone doesn't have a digital footprint. You're like, I don't think I'm going on this
absolutely.
date.
Plus, like for me, I think the only time I go out is for work. I don't
Yeah.
leave the house unless it's for comedy, because it's a harrowing experience to leave the house with the anxiety anyway. It's gotten better over the years, but now to what does it matter? Anyway, and when you go out and you work as a comic, the most people you meet are while you're at work.
Yeah.
I mean, they're there for a show, but you're there for work. So
Yeah.
then, you know, my dick is off.
Yeah.
I'm not looking to meet a prospective
Yes.
mate at my job, you know.
Yeah,
So then
yeah.
the only I crave context. So on a dating
Yeah.
app, I know the context here is very well defined, and there's no, because it really fucks with me, the power dynamic, you know, when your a fan is coming and being flirty with you, you know, it feels very fucked up, like
It is
doesn't
weird,
feel like,
right?
yeah, because
It took me a while. It took me a little while. Well, no, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're single or married. I mean, I think we all know that. I mean, feelings are feelings, right? It took me a while to know to even like get that that's the vibe. Like for a while initially when you start doing this, you don't think of yourself as a comedian and them as your fans. You just think of them as like audience members who are like
Yeah.
maybe think you're quite hot. But then I'm like, oh, wait a minute, this is how you are after they've been watching you on stage own the fucking room for an hour.
Yeah.
Of course they think you're hot. Like
Exactly.
it doesn't, yeah, that's all that it is. And if they get to know you beyond this, they're going to immediately know you're not hot. And so enjoy this moment and walk away peacefully,
Yeah.
and be cool about it. I remember I did a show and a friend of mine came to watch it. And after that, she and I were going to go hang out because this was in Goa. And this one guy came to me after the show and he was like, where are you staying? I want to send some wine. I have a winery. And like totally charming guy and whatever. And I was like, thank you so much, blah, blah, blah. And we left. And my friend was like, was he hitting on you? And I'm like, no, that's what's called a fan moment. And by the way, if you had asked me this 5 years ago, I'd have been like, oh, totally hitting on me. But he's not hitting on me. It's how you feel when you finish watching someone. I feel like that. Like for me, that's the feeling I have when I finish watching somebody on stage for an hour. I'm like, but now I know the difference. So you're right. It is interesting that you crave context and you get it in today's world. You actually know
Yeah.
exactly what's what. But can I
Yeah.
tell you something? That should have been the way it always was. Because let me tell you, I mean, all the shit that's happening now with Chris D'Elia and whatnot, like all these guys who've been busy
Texting, yeah.
texting their young fucking fans, allegedly. I don't know. I feel like, a lot of us don't have the wits about us.
हाँ, I mean, अभी आप सोचो अचानक तुमको ऐसा सेक्सने को मिल गया तो तुम्हारा दिमाग तो चमकेगा ना थोड़ा तो वो तो होना ही
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
see, I speak from a place of privilege, right? I mean, I was either always in a relationship or the anxiety would not allow me to do anything.
Yeah.
To try and chat up a girl after the show. At most, I've managed to chat up someone to buy so that they would buy me a beer or something. Like I'm simple. Like मेरे को six मारने का ही नहीं है. Yeah, but I feel like for the average person, it can get to you, man. When it's overnight. Another thing is when it's overnight, right? Like when you become huge overnight, that's like it's so hard to get used to. I am, because it's taken me 9 years to get to the point where there are fanboys. I very clearly remember, like it wasn't that far ago. Like 3 years ago only, there was nobody there. You know what I mean? I was here when I wasn't famous, and for
Oh my
now,
God, I feel like I've had cycles of that as well. Like it's been like up and then down again. And then hopefully maybe there'll be an up on something else and then down again. So I've definitely had, I've had the loops as well.
Yeah, In the third episode, I think Khamba or somebody said, yeah, Khamba only said, he said, because comedy is such a new thing here, everybody judges their life and their career in 6 months and 1 year and all, you know. And it's like, that's what adulthood is. I've realized now, you know, adulthood is just basically realizing that life is longer than the next year.
It's a marathon. Like, you have to keep
Yeah.
reminding yourself it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And you got to save your energy. And you also have to save your positive fucking attitude because, like you said, you know, the anxiety and the depression and a lot of these things can happen if you pay attention to the wrong things. So
Yeah.
I think life is about putting your attention. If I can say what the only thing that I think I struggle with, but I recognize that that's what I need to struggle with, is just putting my attention in the right place.
Yeah, absolutely. Oof, more knowledge, drop in knowledge like a
Oh my
motherfucking
god!
knowledge dropper.
I can't believe it. It's just dropping these truth bombs everywhere I go.
उफ, ये दहशत मच गया यहाँ पे रास्ते ही खत्म हो गए यहाँ के सब But hey man, it has been a great chat. Thank you so much for doing this.
You too, Akash Mehta.
I hope this felt like everything I pitched it as.
It did. Oh my god, are you kidding me? I was just looking at the time. I'm like, it's 8 o'clock. We've been sitting here for 2 solid hours, and I didn't think we'd actually have that much to talk about. I was like, what does he want to say to me? But it's been awesome. I love
I'm
it.
so glad.
I'm glad we did this.
Hey, but thank you so much for coming on, and thank you, you patron, you who is sitting at home and has paid for this podcast to continue happening.
Especially
Thank
you
very
guys,
much.
especially you patrons.
Yeah, because who in their right minds allows this kind of art to exist, if I can
agree.
even call it art.
I know.
That's the end of this episode. We will be back next week with Vidya Desai from the Comedy Factory, followed by Manan Desai from the Comedy Factory. I don't know the order of these. Matlab, Vidya is first. I don't know who is after that. And after that, maybe the world will end. I'm not sure. So we will see you then. Thank you so much for watching. Okay, bye.